Richard Lawson was a man everyone in the city knew. His name was on tall buildings, his face appeared in business magazines, and his success story was told in conferences and classrooms. He had everything people dreamed of: wealth, cars, mansions, and power. Yet behind his expensive suits and confident smile, Richard carried something no money could ever hide: loneliness. Every evening, after leaving his glass office tower, Richard returned to his giant mansion. The house was beautiful, decorated with art and filled with luxury. But it was silent, so silent that sometimes he could hear only the sound of his own footsteps. No laughter, no family, no one waiting at the dinner table. Just him and the empty rooms. People envied Richard, but nobody knew the truth. He was a man who ate alone, traveled alone, and celebrated victories alone. When he attended events, women smiled at him, but he always saw the same look in their eyes: interest not in him, but in his wealth. He had tried dating before, but every time, it ended the same way: disappointment. Deep inside, Richard wanted something real. A voice that cared for him, not his money. A smile that shone because of love, not diamonds. But years of betrayal had made him cold. He told himself, real love doesn't exist for people like me. Everyone only sees the money. One morning, his younger sister called. She was worried about him. "Richard, when are you going to settle down? You can't keep living like this," she said gently. Richard laughed bitterly. "Settle down? With who? Every woman I meet looks at my bank account, not my heart." His sister sighed. "You don't see it, but people talk. They say you're arrogant, heartless. At least bring someone with you to the company gala. It's embarrassing that our brother, the great Richard Lawson, always comes alone." The words hit him harder than he expected. The annual company gala was only a week away. It was the biggest event of the year. Partners, investors, employees, and media all gathered there. Richard hated it, not because of business, but because of the personal questions. Every year, people whispered, "Why is he still single?" Or, "With all his money, can't he find someone?" That night, Richard sat in his study, staring at the city lights through the window. He poured himself a drink, thinking about his life. He had achieved everything he once dreamed of, but what good was success when his heart was so empty? He thought about the gala again. The thought of facing those whispers, those stares, made him restless. For once, he wished he had someone by his side, not for love, but just to silence the world. An idea slowly formed in his mind. It was unusual. It was even a little crazy. But the more he thought about it, the more it made sense. If he couldn't find real love, maybe he could at least create an illusion of it. What if I hire someone to act as my girlfriend? He thought. The idea shocked even him. Richard Lawson, the city's most respected billionaire, pretending to have a girlfriend? It sounded ridiculous. But at the same time, it felt like the only way to escape the endless questions, the pitying looks, and the constant loneliness that clung to him like a shadow. 4 days, he couldn't shake off the thought. His assistants noticed his silence, his distracted behavior, but no one dared to ask. Richard was a man of power, and people feared him too much to question him. One evening, he decided to have dinner at a quiet cafe instead of his usual high-class restaurants. He wanted peace, a place where no one recognized him. The cafe was small, warm, and filled with the smell of fresh coffee and baked bread. As he sat at a corner table, he noticed the waitress who came to take his order. She was young, maybe in her mid-20s. Her uniform was simple, her hair tied back in a messy bun, and her smile carried a tired sweetness. Unlike the glamorous women Richard usually met, this girl was ordinary, but there was something about her. Her eyes held a quiet strength, the kind that comes from struggle. "Good evening, sir. What would you like to order?" she asked politely. Richard studied her for a moment before replying. "Just a coffee." As she walked away, Richard felt something unusual. Her smile had not changed when she looked at him. There was no flicker of recognition, no fake charm, no attempt to impress. To her, he was just another customer. That night, Richard left the cafe with a strange feeling in his chest. He didn't even finish his coffee. He just kept thinking about the waitress, her tired smile, her honest eyes. Maybe she could be the one, he thought. Not the one to love, but the one to help him. The one to play the role he needed for the gala. And so, for the first time in years, Richard Lawson made a decision that had nothing to do with business, power, or money. It was a decision born from loneliness and desperation. He would return to the cafe. He would speak to the waitress. and he would make her an offer that would change both of their lives forever. Her name was Emma Hayes. To most customers at the cafe, she was just the waitress with the tired smile. But behind that smile was a life full of struggles that few could imagine. Emma had grown up in a small town, raised by a single mother who worked 2 jobs to put food on the table. From a young age, Emma learned what responsibility meant. While other children played with toys, she helped her mother wash dishes, clean laundry, and take care of the small apartment they lived in. Her dream had always been simple. She didn't want riches or fame. All she wanted was stability, a life where she didn't have to worry about rent, bills, or whether she would have enough money to eat tomorrow. But life had never been kind to her. Now in her mid-20s, Emma was stuck in the city, working double shifts at the cafe just to survive. The pay was low, the hours were long, and the customers weren't always polite. Still, she forced herself to smile every day. She believed that a smile, even if tired, could hide pain. After finishing her shift, she usually walked back to her small apartment on the edge of town. The building was old, the walls cracked, and the neighbors were loud. She lived alone, with only a small window that gave her a view of the streetlights outside. At night, she would sit at her tiny kitchen table, counting coins and bills, trying to figure out how to stretch her paycheck. Sometimes she skipped meals so she could pay her electricity bill. Sometimes she worked late shifts, even when her legs ached, just to make a little extra. Emma had dreams once, dreams of going to college, of becoming a teacher, of helping children the way her own teachers once helped her. But those dreams had been buried long ago, replaced by the harsh reality of survival. And yet, despite everything, Emma carried a quiet dignity. She never begged, never complained. She kept her head high, even when life tried to push her down. One evening, after another exhausting shift, she returned home and found an overdue notice on her door. Rent was late again. Her heart sank. She sat on her bed, holding the paper in her hands, fighting back tears. "What am I going to do?" she whispered to herself. It was in this moment of despair that her mind returned to the strange man she had served earlier at the cafe. The man with the sharp suit and piercing eyes. He had ordered only a coffee, but there was something unusual about him. Unlike most wealthy customers, he hadn't looked at her with arrogance. His gaze had been different, curious, thoughtful. Emma shook her head. "Why am I even thinking about him?" she told herself. "People like him don't notice people like me." But she was wrong. The next evening, as Emma carried a tray of drinks to a table, she noticed the same man sitting in the corner again. His presence startled her, though she tried not to show it. "Good evening, sir. Coffee again?" she asked politely. He gave a small smile. "Yes. And maybe a little of your time, if you're not too busy." Emma blinked. Customers rarely asked for her time. She forced a smile, trying to stay professional. "I'll bring your coffee first." When she returned, he gestured for her to sit. For a moment, she hesitated. Then, curiosity got the better of her. She sat across from him, her hands folded nervously in her lap. "I'm Richard Lawson," he said simply. Her eyes widened slightly. The name sounded familiar. She had seen it on buildings, in newspapers. This was not just a rich man, this was the rich man. The billionaire. "What do you want from me?" she asked carefully, suspicion in her voice. Richard leaned forward, lowering his tone. "I want to make you an offer. It may sound strange, but hear me out." Emma's heart raced. She had no idea what he was about to say, but something in his eyes told her this was serious. "I need someone to act as my girlfriend for a short time," Richard continued. "Just for appearances. I will pay you well. More than you can make here in months. All you need to do is accompany me to events, smile, and play the role." Emma froze. His words felt unreal, like something out of a movie. She stared at him, searching his face for signs of a joke, but he was completely serious. Her mind spun with questions. Why me? Why a poor waitress? What does he really want? She thought of her unpaid rent, the overdue bills, the life she was desperately trying to hold together. The offer could solve everything, at least for a while. But it also felt risky, dangerous even. Richard noticed her hesitation. "You don't need to answer now," he said calmly. "Think about it. I'll be back tomorrow. If you agree, I promise you won't regret it." Emma nodded slowly, though her mind was still in chaos. She watched as he stood up, left some money on the table, and walked out of the cafe. That night, she lay awake in bed, staring at the ceiling. His words echoed in her mind. "Act as my girlfriend. I will pay you well. For the first time in years, Emma felt a strange pull of destiny. She didn't know whether to fear it or embrace it. But deep inside, she knew one thing: her life was about to change. The next evening, Emma felt uneasy as she walked into the cafe. She had hardly slept the night before, her mind restless with thoughts of Richard's offer. Part of her wanted to forget it, to pretend it never happened. But another part of her couldn't stop thinking about the possibilities. Sure enough, Richard Lawson was already there, sitting at the same corner table, his eyes calm but watchful. When Emma approached, her hands trembled slightly as she placed the coffee before him. "Have you thought about my offer?" Richard asked quietly, his gaze fixed on her. Emma hesitated. She wanted to say no, to push away the strange, dangerous idea. But the image of her unpaid bills, her landlord's angry face, and her mother's tired smile haunted her. Finally, she nodded. "Yes," she whispered. "I'll do it." A small smile appeared on Richard's lips. He reached into his pocket, took out a sleek envelope, and slid it across the table. Inside was more money than Emma had ever seen in her life. "This is just the beginning," he said. "The rest will come after the gala. For now, consider this an agreement between us." Emma's heart raced as she touched the envelope. This wasn't a dream. It was real. The following days felt like stepping into another world. Richard's assistant delivered dresses, shoes, and even jewelry to Emma's apartment. She was taken to a stylist, who transformed her tired appearance into something elegant and graceful. For the first time, when Emma looked in the mirror, she barely recognized herself. "You look beautiful," Richard told her during their first rehearsal dinner. The words made Emma's cheeks flush, though she reminded herself that this was all just business. They practiced how to hold hands, how to smile for the cameras, how to look at each other as if they were truly in love. At first, it felt awkward. Emma stumbled, laughed nervously, and avoided Richard's gaze. But as days passed, something began to shift. Richard, who had always been cold and distant, started showing glimpses of warmth. He asked about her life, her favorite books, her childhood memories. Emma was surprised. No one had ever cared to ask her such things before. One evening, after rehearsal, Richard confessed, "You're different from the people I usually meet. They all want something from me: money, power, status. But you don't ask for anything." Emma lowered her eyes. "If only you knew," she thought. "I'm doing this because I need money too." But she couldn't bring herself to say it out loud. At the same time, Emma began noticing things about Richard that no one else saw. Behind his confident exterior, he was lonely, almost fragile. His laughter, rare and brief, sounded genuine when she was around. She realized that the mighty billionaire wasn't as untouchable as the world believed. Finally, the night of the gala arrived. Emma stood beside Richard in a dazzling gown, her hair shining under the lights. As they entered the hall together, whispers filled the air. "Who is she?" "She's not from his world." "A billionaire with a waitress." "Impossible." Emma felt the weight of 1,000 eyes on her. She clung to Richard's arm, trying to smile, though her heart pounded. But Richard leaned down and whispered in her ear, "Don't be afraid. Just look at me." She did. And for a moment, the noise of the crowd disappeared. The evening went smoother than Emma expected. Richard introduced her to powerful businessmen, famous celebrities, and even politicians. She spoke politely, smiled warmly, and impressed everyone with her simple grace. To the world, she looked like a woman deeply in love with a rich man. But something strange happened. Somewhere between the fake laughs and staged smiles, Emma felt a spark of something real. When Richard held her hand, it didn't feel like acting anymore. When he looked at her, she forgot about the money, the agreement, the risks. Later that night, as the gala ended, Richard drove her home. The city lights blurred outside the car windows. For a long time, neither of them spoke. Finally, Richard broke the silence. "Thank you, Emma. Tonight, for the first time in years, I didn't feel alone." His words pierced her heart. She wanted to tell him the truth, that she wasn't just doing this to help him, but also to save herself. That her acceptance had been born from desperation, not kindness. But instead, she simply nodded. As she stepped out of the car, Richard added softly, "This may have started as an act. But somehow, it doesn't feel like pretending anymore." Emma froze, her breath caught in her throat. She didn't know what to say. She closed the door, walked into her apartment, and leaned against the wall, her hands shaking. Because deep inside, she knew he was right. What had started as a simple deal was turning into something dangerous, something real. After the gala, something in Richard's life changed. People at the company talked about him differently now. They no longer whispered about his loneliness or mocked his empty personal life. Instead, they admired the woman by his side. But what surprised Richard the most was not the silence of the gossip, it was how much he missed Emma when she wasn't around. At first, their arrangement had been simple: appear together, smile for the cameras, play the role of a loving couple. But soon, Richard found himself calling Emma outside of events. He would ask her to join him for dinner, to walk in the park, even to watch movies in his private theater. Emma was cautious at first. She reminded herself again and again, this is not real. It's only a job. But slowly, she felt her heart softening. When Richard laughed, it felt genuine. When he asked about her day, he listened carefully, something no one had ever done for her. She discovered that beneath his wealth and power, he was just a man, lonely, wounded, and searching for warmth. One rainy evening, Richard invited Emma to his mansion. She was nervous, unsure how to behave in such a grand place. The marble floors shone, the chandeliers sparkled, and priceless paintings lined the walls. "Don't let the house scare you," Richard said with a small smile, noticing her unease. "It's big, but empty. You're the only one who makes it feel less lonely." Emma looked at him, surprised by his honesty. For a man so powerful, he often spoke with disarming simplicity around her. Later, as they sat by the fireplace, Richard opened up about his past. "When I was younger, I thought money could solve everything," he admitted. "I built this empire, but along the way, I lost people I cared about. Friends, relationships, even myself." Emma listened quietly, her heart aching for him. She wanted to tell him he wasn't alone anymore, but she held back. She couldn't let herself fall too deep. Not when she carried a secret he didn't know. The more time they spent together, the harder it became for Emma to hide her feelings. She found herself laughing more, smiling more, even dreaming again. Yet, with every tender moment, guilt pressed heavier on her chest. Because Emma knew she wasn't being honest. Richard believed she was simply a waitress who had agreed to a strange deal. But her truth was far more complicated, a truth that could shatter everything if revealed. At times, she almost confessed. One night, as they walked along the quiet streets after dinner, she opened her mouth to speak. But Richard suddenly said, "Emma, I feel like I can trust you more than anyone. Please, don't ever leave." His words silenced her. She couldn't break his trust now. Not yet. Meanwhile, Richard's world was shifting. His employees noticed the change. He smiled more often. He was kinder, calmer. The man once known for his cold heart now looked almost human. All because of Emma. One afternoon, during a board meeting, a colleague joked, "Seems like our boss has finally found his weakness, love." Richard only smirked, but deep inside, the words felt true. Emma wasn't just playing a role anymore. She was becoming his light in a dark world. But there were others who didn't approve. Some business partners whispered that Emma wasn't good enough for him. They mocked her background, her simple manners. Richard defended her fiercely. "Her worth isn't measured by money," he said firmly. "She's more genuine than anyone I've ever met." Emma overheard those words once, and they made her eyes fill with tears. Yet the guilt in her heart grew stronger. If he knew the truth, would he still defend her? Or would everything fall apart? One night, after a long day, Richard invited Emma to the rooftop of his office tower. The city stretched before them, glittering with lights. "Do you ever wonder what your life would be like if things had gone differently?" Richard asked softly. Emma stared at the skyline. "All the time," she admitted. "Sometimes I think, maybe I wasn't meant to struggle so much. Maybe life could have been different." Richard looked at her, his eyes searching hers. "With you, I feel like life can be different. For the first time, I believe in something real." Emma's chest tightened. She wanted to cry, to scream, to confess everything. But instead, she forced a smile. Because she knew that soon, the secret she carried would no longer stay hidden. And when that day came, Richard's world, and hers, would never be the same again. Emma had carried the weight of her secret for weeks. Every time Richard looked at her with trust in his eyes, the guilt inside her grew heavier. She wanted to tell him the truth, but fear held her back. Fear that once he knew, everything between them would collapse. But secrets have a way of coming out, no matter how hard someone tries to hide them. It happened on an ordinary evening. Richard had invited Emma to a private dinner at his mansion. The atmosphere was soft and warm, with candles on the table and gentle music playing in the background. For a while, it felt like a dream, two people, laughing, sharing stories, almost like a real couple. But as the night grew quiet, Richard suddenly asked a question that froze Emma's heart. "Emma, I've told you about my past, my family, my struggles. But you've never really told me yours. Why is that?" Emma's hands trembled as she set down her fork. She forced a smile, but Richard's eyes didn't let her escape. "There's something you're not telling me, isn't there?" he said softly, but firmly. Emma lowered her gaze. Her secret was clawing at her, begging to be revealed. She took a deep breath. "Richard, there's something you need to know about me. Something I should have told you from the start." Richard leaned closer, his expression serious. "What is it?" Her voice shook. "I wasn't just working at the cafe to make ends meet. The truth is, I used to know your family. Years ago." Richard's brows furrowed. "My family?" Emma nodded slowly. "When I was younger, my mother worked as a maid in your father's house. We lived in the servants' quarters. I grew up watching your world from the shadows." Richard's eyes widened. Memories of his childhood home rushed back, memories of maids, cooks, and servants who kept the grand house running. But he couldn't recall Emma. "You mean, you were there, in my home?" "Yes," Emma whispered. "You probably don't remember me. I was just a child. But I remember you. You were always distant, always surrounded by people who wanted your attention. I used to watch from afar and wonder what it felt like to live your life." Richard stared at her, speechless. Emma's voice broke as she continued. "When your father's company went through trouble, he fired most of the staff. My mother lost her job. We lost everything. She worked herself to death trying to raise me alone. That's why I ended up in the cafe. That's why I struggled all these years. And when you came that night and offered me money, I accepted because I was desperate. Not because I wanted to trick you, but because I had no choice." Tears filled her eyes as she whispered, "I never meant to lie to you, Richard. But I couldn't tell you. I was afraid you'd see me as a fraud, or worse, as someone who wanted revenge." The room fell silent. Richard's mind spun. 1,000 thoughts collided inside him. All this time, he believed Emma was just a random waitress he had chosen. But now, he realized their lives had been connected long before. She wasn't a stranger, she was part of a past he had long forgotten. "Why didn't you tell me earlier?" Richard finally asked, his voice heavy. Emma's tears rolled down her cheeks. "Because I didn't want to lose this. You made me feel alive again. For once in my life, I felt like I mattered. And I was terrified that if you knew the truth, you'd walk away." Richard stood up, running his hand through his hair in frustration. His heart ached. He didn't know what to think. Part of him felt betrayed, as if she had been hiding in plain sight. But another part of him understood her pain, her desperation, her fear. "Emma," he said after a long silence, "I don't know if I can trust you now. Everything we built, it feels like it was based on a lie." Emma's chest tightened. His words stabbed her heart, but she didn't argue. She simply whispered, "I'm sorry." Richard turned away, unable to look at her. "I need time to think." That night, Emma left the mansion with tears streaming down her face. The streets felt colder, the world heavier. She had finally revealed her secret, but instead of freedom, it left her broken. Back inside the mansion, Richard poured himself a drink and stared into the darkness. His emotions battled inside him, anger, confusion, sadness. Yet, beneath it all, there was something else, the echo of Emma's tears, and the undeniable truth that despite everything, he still cared for her. The secret was out. The fragile world they had built together was now trembling on the edge. Neither of them knew what would happen next. But one thing was certain, Richard's world would never be the same again. The days after Emma's confession were heavy with silence. Richard did not call. He did not visit the cafe. He did not send a single message. Emma went to work as usual, but her heart was shattered. Every cup of coffee she served, every smile she gave to a customer, it all felt empty. She had told the truth at last, but in doing so, she had lost the only man who ever made her feel seen. At night, she lay awake, replaying Richard's words again and again, "I don't know if I can trust you now." Meanwhile, Richard buried himself in work. Meetings, calls, reports, he filled his days with numbers and contracts, trying to quiet the storm inside him. But nothing worked. Everywhere he turned, he saw Emma's face. He heard her laugh. He remembered her tears. His heart told him one thing, but his pride told him another. He didn't want to admit how much she meant to him, especially after she had hidden so much. And yet, no matter how hard he tried, he couldn't let her go. One rainy afternoon, Richard found himself walking past the cafe where he had first met Emma. He stood outside, watching through the window. There she was, moving from table to table, serving customers with her gentle smile, even though he could see the sadness in her eyes. Something broke inside him at that moment. He realized that Emma wasn't a liar who wanted to trick him. She was a survivor. A woman who had carried pain and hardship yet still chose kindness. She had been a part of his world long before he ever knew it, and maybe fate had brought them together again for a reason. Richard pushed open the door. The bell above the entrance chimed, and Emma froze. She looked up and saw him standing there, tall, serious, but with softness in his eyes she hadn't seen before. Her hands trembled. "Richard," she whispered. The cafe went silent, the customers sensing the tension. Richard walked toward her slowly. "Emma, we need to talk." She nodded, her heart racing. They stepped outside into the drizzle, the city lights reflecting on the wet pavement. For a long moment, neither spoke. Then Richard finally broke the silence. "I was angry," he admitted, his voice low. "Not because you knew my family. Not because you worked in my home as a child. But because you didn't trust me enough to tell me. That's what hurt the most." Emma's eyes filled with tears. "I wanted to tell you so many times. But every time I tried, I froze. You gave me a life I never dreamed of, Richard. I was terrified that if you knew the truth, it would all disappear." Richard took a deep breath. It did disappear. For a while. "But Emma, I realized something. Even when I was furious, even when I thought I could walk away, I couldn't stop caring about you. I don't want this to end." Emma gasped softly. You mean that?" He stepped closer, his voice firm but tender. "Yes. You didn't destroy my world, Emma. You changed it. You showed me what it feels like to be real again. To laugh. To hope. To love." Her tears spilled over as she whispered, "I never wanted your money, Richard. All I ever wanted was to be seen. To be loved for who I am." "And you are," Richard said, his hand gently brushing away her tears. "For exactly who you are." At that moment, the storm inside both their hearts finally broke. Emma collapsed into his arms, sobbing with relief, and Richard held her tightly, as if he would never let go again. Weeks passed, and their relationship grew stronger. This time, there were no lies, no secrets. Emma told Richard everything about her past, about her mother, about the hardships she had faced. And Richard, instead of turning away, listened with compassion. He helped her honor her mother's memory by starting a foundation for single mothers who struggled to survive, just as Emma's mother had. Together, they gave hope to women who thought the world had forgotten them. Emma no longer worked at the cafe. Instead, she stood by Richard's side, not as a paid companion, but as his partner, his equal, his love. At company events, people still whispered about them. Some admired, some doubted. But Richard didn't care. Whenever he looked at Emma, he knew she was the only truth in a world full of lies. One evening, as they stood on the same rooftop where they once spoke about life, Richard held her hand and whispered, "Do you remember when I asked if you ever wondered how life could have been different?" Emma smiled softly. "Yes." Richard looked into her eyes. "I don't wonder anymore. Because I have you. And that's all I'll ever need." Emma's heart swelled with emotion. She had walked into his life as a waitress, carrying a secret that nearly destroyed everything. But in the end, that secret led them to a love neither of them had ever imagined. Richard's world had indeed been turned upside down. But instead of losing everything, he had found the one thing he had been searching for all along, a heart that truly loved him. And Emma, the woman who once feared she was nothing, discovered that she was everything to the man who once had everything but love. Together, they had finally found what money could never buy: peace, trust, and a love that would last forever.